Daphne, Chantel, and Clinton were students or what year they are, if they were willing to share what's going on with their studies or professions. And then I can go ahead and get started, Dr. Peterson. Does that sound?
Yes, why don't I just do an introduction? Thank you so much for joining us today. Uh, Sarah Porch is a major in anthropology, and she will talk to us about her volunteer work. And I'm going to mute myself and let everybody else respond to
Okay, sounds good. So we've got a freshman and a junior. Thank you guys so much for tuning in today and looking forward to everyone being able to learn with me a little bit more about what I'm doing and maybe people on the recording as well after this time and at a later date. So, like Dr. Peterson said, my name is Sarah Porch Lee. I live in Tampa, Florida. And a little bit more about me. I'm getting actually my second bachelor's degree. This is the first one from Ashford, and I am majoring in cultural anthropology. So I'm in my senior year, and I'm planning on graduating and receiving a Bachelor of Arts by the end of this year or the beginning of next year. And I hope to quickly begin graduate work upon graduating. So for right now, my current profession, I teach or tutor English remotely from home to South Korean professionals living in South Korea. So it's Saturday already in South Korea. So I'm on my weekend today. They don't have to go to their English school on their Saturdays. So like I mentioned earlier, this is my second bachelor's degree. So I previously earned a Bachelor of Science in Human Resources Development, and I worked in pensions throughout my 20s. But I quickly became to realize that working in business was not my passion and wasn't what I wanted to do with my life. So I analyzed what I was interested in and looked at what that could mean for me professionally, and this brought me to the conclusion that working in archaeology or anthropology was the perfect alignment of career and personal interests. So, this was a completely new field for me, and due to a complication with my original university, it became evident that I needed to earn a second bachelor's degree and try to just transfer as many credits as possible from my original university. And Ashford University was the perfect culmination of what I was looking for and, the intersection of my goals. So that's what brought me here. However, since it was a totally new field and I didn't really know if it was going to be a good fit, maybe I wouldn't like it at all, maybe it was just all in my head. And also to boost my resume, since I'm now a little bit older than a normal student, I decided to go ahead and get right into the volunteer world and to boost my resume and to really gauge my interest in the field. So that's ultimately what our chat is about today. So I like to keep things organized, so I decided to make a list and search the internet. So I began to research for organizations that I could potentially work with, and I decided to then make a list of those I contacted. Now, of course, this is just very general. You have an excuse, go Google things. Always type the name of your city in the search bar, and then behind it, type museum or history center, archaeological societies, groups, labs, state parks, preserves, national parks. These are the key words that you can use to search areas in your city to see if there are any places that you might be able to reach out to and find out if they accept volunteers. Most likely they do, and they are probably very interested in you coming out maybe a few hours on the weekend or the week to just help out. You'll learn things, you'll be able to gauge your interest, and it is going to be a great networking tool, and it will also be incredibly helpful for you to gauge your interest and see, am I studying the right thing? Because studying is very expensive and very time consuming, and you want to make sure you're making the proper investment in yourself and your future. So keep it organized, make a list of the possibilities. I started my spreadsheet. I then began to send out emails and contacts. So I think I sent out one Facebook message even. The page wasn't monitored. I never got a response. But my list got to remain short. All three of the original emails that I sent got responses back, at least on some level. So one was for a vessel, a ship. I believe it was used in World War II. It had been turned into a museum. And I sent him my resume, and he wanted me to come in to meet with him and start work at an event they were hosting very soon. It was all happening very quickly, but our schedules never meshed. I figured I wasn't fully interested in that outlet, and I went ahead and just let that one slide. I didn't need it. It didn't feel like a right fit. An email I sent out to a woman connected with an archaeological group was also successful, but in a different way. She herself didn't actually need my help, but she knew someone who did. And she forwarded my email to Dr. Bob Austin, who led lab work at the Weeden Island Research and Education, or Archaeological Research and Education. And so she went ahead and forwarded my email to him. We struck up some email correspondence, and then I quickly went into work on that archaeological lab on Saturday mornings. It all went very smoothly. And then one other place I contacted was the Tampa Bay History Center. I contacted them through their website, but from what I remember, they never reached back. The contact somehow got lost in translation. It's somewhere floating out there. I never heard back, but I was really interested in working with them. So I went ahead and reached out again. I found a little bit more of a direct route to contact them and followed up, and sure enough, they were interested. So it just took a little bit of extra outreach on my part, and lo and behold, they were interested. So I sent them my resume. They called me in for an interview and then subsequently accepted me to work in their collections department, as I had requested. They had many different areas, this museum, where volunteers can work, and I specifically wanted to work in the collections department with their gifts. And then here, repeat these steps if necessary on a professional, number of contacts, and then start over. I believe it's very possible and pretty likely that these places will need volunteer work. So, as I had mentioned, the interviews and meetings were desired by the museums and the ship, but they were very much relaxed and informal. It was helpful to have a resume ready to go and just to be able to hand them. If nothing else, it looks very professional, even if they don't need it. Now, the archaeology lab greatly desires public involvement, and they did not have an interview process. If you wanted to help, great. There was work to be done. Just come on and do it. So I began to work at the History Center Museum last summer, and I've continued to work there up until this day. Now, they consider it to be an internship, and interest to remain there in this capacity does need to be reviewed quarterly. And I have to say, my studies at Ashford have even honed my interest a little bit further, and I'm feeling that while museum work has been helpful, it's not going to be my end goal with my degree. So I'll likely look for a new volunteer opportunity soon to replace that museum work, maybe very likely at a state or national park, something in nature. I think that might be more what I'm aiming for. So I want to talk a little bit more specifically about what I get to do at the History Museum, at the History Center. So I go in once a week on Monday mornings. This is not time intensive. You do need to have about several hours a week to give it due diligence, but it is not time intensive. I go in once a week. They don't pay me, so it's low commitment on their end as well. So if I need time off, I take it. So to paint the picture of what it's like there, volunteers need to sign in. The museum has a secured elevator to get up there. Upon signing in, our collections department volunteer coordinator takes us up to the collections department, and then we all have assigned tasks that we're working on. When we finish one project, well, then we are assigned to another one, and it seems like the tasks are just never ending. There's always something to do. So the types of things that I've worked on have been quite varied. One of the things I've worked on, or one of the first things I worked on actually, was the uniform worn by an army man in Korea. So the uniform it was donated to the museum with other items from his service. And the uniform had to be accessioned or put into the museum's data service system. And this means that it had to be assigned a number in the museum's storage software system, like a book in a library. Pictures had to be taken of the uniform, a description had to be input into the system, measurements had to be taken and recorded. After all this information is put in, the uniform has to be tagged with its number and then has to be properly folded according to best storage purposes, which will then help the uniform remain in its best shape for the duration of its time there. I've also been able to work with a local artist supply kit and travel pack. The local artist created work for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, Tampa's professional football team. And his artifacts are, or his things really, they are important to the history of our city. So I would accession, or once again put into the system, each tube of paint, each paintbrush, each item, and each one would have a tag. Every item would be assigned a number for storage for record keeping purposes. A description had to be added for each item. A picture had to be taken of each item and then uploaded. Measurements, even of each tube of paint, had to be added. And search terms entered as well. And location, so that once it's pulled up in the system, you could go right to the place in the collections department, locate it, and then retrieve it. So I've also been able to work with some old photographs. They were donated about a play which took place in the 50s in an old Tampa theater, The Importance of Being Earnest. Photos from a Gasparilla parade. This is a rich Tampa history tradition. Even to this day, every year we have the parade. Someone comes in on a pirate ship in the Tampa Bay. The mayor of the city gives him the keys to the city, and then a parade happens. This is happening back in the 50s, and someone at some point took tons of photos of it and then donated them to the museum. So now each photo has to be put into the system. Just like I mentioned before, all those details, each photo, each small piece. But I have to say, some of my favorite things to work on have been the letters that have been saved throughout the year. So this truly gives me a peek into how life was in years gone by. I've been able to work with letters and telegrams from the Depression era. Seeing how life was lived by people in my community it's truly fascinating. It's very enjoyable for people interested in these things. Some other items of interest have been marketing mail for a product called Alkaban, which seems to have been a substance being marketed after Prohibition ended. So the marketing even had testimonials of, people who would sneak this substance into people's drinks without their knowledge in order to heal them from alcoholism. Of course, this would not be legal today, but it is so interesting to see the very interesting products that were legal and publicly marketed back in the day. I have seen propaganda linking Martin Luther King with communism, just amazing things that people were reading and taking for granted back then. I brought this up to my dad this weekend. Oh yeah, I remember that. And it was such a conversation starter. Oh yeah, it was obvious, people did that back then. Also, I've seen propaganda about the Equal Rights Act being fought under the guise of not wanting women to be drafted. So it has been quite a learning experience. Very interesting to see the way life was lived back then. But besides all those interesting things, perhaps the most the thing with the most practical value has been learning past perfect, which is the software system for the storage of the data in the museum. So learning this standard museum software has been an integral part of my internship at the museum and has really given me valuable experience in that field. I've already told you its useful purposes, all those things: accession, photos taken, location, information entered, search terms. It just keeps everything stored and easily accessible. It essentially stores all the items in the museum and has kept them organizable and locatable. And I'm seeing here there's some comments, and I can definitely look through those towards the end of the presentation, or maybe Dr. Peterson will be able to respond to those as she's able. So for now, I'd like to tell you a little bit more about my work at the lab. Basically, I have worked at the Lab for Alliance for Weeden Island Archaeological Research and Education. And basically, this lab is generally managed by Dr. Bob Austin, and it is located on the Weeden Island Preserve premises. I'm going to take a drink one moment. So my first day in the lab was pretty interesting. I was able to sort pieces of Native American pottery that came across their paths via a family of a deceased collector. It seems this man had done quite a lot of digs somewhere. He was not an archaeologist. I don't know how valid his digging had been, but he had tons of pottery pieces. And they came across this lab. So, boxes and boxes of pieces. So they were emptied and sorted by us. We sorted plain pieces together. We sorted decorated pieces together. We bagged them accordingly. We labeled the bags. The lab wasn't sure if, in the end, these pieces would be gifted to them, so detailed analysis of the pieces in the pottery were not done at that time. But Dr. Austin and the geologist who regularly volunteers there were able to ID some of the pieces, or some of the decorated pieces, with some standard known pottery styles and designs from the time. It was a pretty great first day at the lab. It had some great value to it. Basically, it accustomed my eye to the different design elements, just finding out if something's an edge piece or not. You just kind of your eye gets used to it. I was a little bit more rounded. Seeing different styles, that are used in some areas. Maybe even imagining how one piece stylized in one area would have made its way to another geographical area. How does that happen? Did they start using that, making that style in this area? Did they trade? What are the implications here? I have also been shown the art of lab data entry in a spreadsheet that they keep there for informational purposes. So interestingly, while I was there, or around the time I'd been there, the lab had recently got past Perfect, that software I told you the museum used. So I assume that eventually the labs and preserves items will find their way into a more streamlined system, but for now it's just an Excel spreadsheet. But basically, there are just bags waiting in the lab for entering the system, and they will be completed like this. A bag will be taken from the shelf and emptied on the tray. And this is a bag that would have come from a dig. I will then sort the items by type: bone, shell, beads, pottery sherds, etc. I will attempt to even sort the shells by type using a book for ID purposes, like the whelk. What type of whelk? Based by shell opening, lightning whelk, spin open to the left. You just kind of learn all these things as you go. Perhaps a clamshell will go in its own pile. The value of this, my eye becomes a little more practiced at distinguishing between bone, snake vertebrae, fish bones, which are round. Bone is typically porous and can be ID'd in this manner, usually without a microscope. I am not an expert. I'm a newbie, but I could just a little bit learn these things and realize what things looked like, or my eye becomes a little bit more accustomed to it. Perhaps even small pieces of charcoal will be included in the bag. So after the items have all been sorted by group, they will be entered in the system. I will locate the information about it, how deep into the ground it was found, the date it was found, the trench it was found in, the type of the artifact, shell, lightning whelk, and how many of the artifact, 2 lightning whelks. Each artifact will then be rebagged in a new, clean, size-appropriate bag, and I will then write the information on each bag for storage purposes, also including the initials of the person who first found it at the site. Bag labeling can be a little bit tedious. A lot of information will go on these bags. The site name, for example, Trench 1. The depth information as to where it was found below datum with measurements. The date of the artifact retrieval. General bag elements, shell, bone, pottery sherds. And then the number of pieces in the bag, the initials of the people who engaged in that bag, and a small description. So if it's like pottery, you might say it's decorated, you might identify it as plain. I've been able to engage a little bit in artifact washing, bone washing, animal bone washing. So since artifacts were initially removed from dirt at a site, they've basically just been sitting in bags of dirt awaiting storage procedures. And they simply need to be cleaned, whether shells or bones. A strainer can be used to keep them safe from the drain, but then just water and a brush, is all I've ever, really used on those things. Very gentle washing, to keep them safe and then rinsed. So here we have a map. I want to just show you a little bit of where it's located. Here, we can see I'm located on the west coast of Florida. Where that arrow was pointing, there's a star up to the left of it. That's St. Petersburg. So if you go a little bit north of that, almost parallel, if you will, to that island jutting, that peninsula jutting down from Tampa, that is where the preserve is located, up a little bit north of St. Petersburg. So just to give you an idea of where in Florida I'm talking about, and where the history really took place. So that's just a little bit about that location right there. So why here? Why this part of Florida? Well, and why are we digging here? While I was working at the lab, it was decided to finish excavating a trench that had been begun, I believe, in the 70s by looters. Now, of course, now we know and we are taught to not just go start digging anywhere. That is not ethical. We know better than that now. I don't know if the rules were different in the 70s or if they were just plain looters, but regardless, a trench was begun, and now I have had experience working in it. But regardless, this trench that had been started unofficially, and I believe there was more than one, in a shell midden, which was, on Weeden Island, it was decided to go ahead and continue with the work or damage which had already been done. So what is the context of it? What's the history of Weeden Island? Who cares about it? Well, a lot of people actually. One of the most interesting things about a dig is who it was, how old. That's what we all want to know. How old are the things? Who are these people? Well, the Pinellas County Department of Environmental Management, Environmental Lands Division in 2005 wrote the Weeden Island story, and they summarized the history very well. As you saw, it's there around St. Petersburg in Pinellas County, and near the Gulf of Mexico side of Florida. It is believed that people began living on Weeden Island about 5,000 to 3,000 BCE, or before the Common Era, in the Middle Archaic period. Then pottery was thought to have been put in use on Weeden Island about 3,000 to 500 BCE in the late Archaic period. It is also known that the Yakutishi people group lived on Weeden Island and were connected with the people who lived on the main part of Weeden Island, although it is thought that it seems like they believe these were two separate people groups, but that was key information. And basically, the people of Weeden Island created an amazing culture for themselves. It actually remains a fairly well-known and well-documented culture, in my opinion, and I believe others. And specifically, they had a special form of pottery style, burial method, and a way of constructing their homes. They did that in their own way. So that was a little bit of the context of why here and who was there previously. Um, I've got a couple photos included with the Weeden Island. This was not the day right here of our dig, but that is the trench that I'm talking about. And even I believe the next picture, I believe it's still the same trench that you'll see on the next slide. But just to give you a little bit idea, this is Weeden Island that I'm talking about. Well, what did we want to find? Why were we there? So let me just preface this by saying I was the epitome of a shovel bum on this dig. I was a recent addition to that volunteer crew. I was brought into the middle of a dig which had been on people's minds for a while now. Not to mention, I was surrounded by Tampa Bay experts in this area, very educated people who knew all about this. I kept my hands busy, my mouth shut for the most part, and just took part in that experience of doing what I was told. But as with any dig, the goal is to find out more about the people who previously lived there, or at least a dig of this context or idea. We want to know, what did they eat? What kind of pottery they had, or maybe even made? Perhaps where their building structures were located, even about their tool use. As we learned, or will learn from class, archaeology is less Indiana Jones on an everyday basis and more about learning about people through their trash. Now, that doesn't sound very nice, but it's still very enjoyable to discover these things. But I wasn't running through caves from mystical gods. I was digging through the trash, and I still very much enjoyed it. So those are the things that I would assume, I wanted to find. Well, what did we actually find? Well, what we found and what I got to experience was pretty much exactly what I would say we had been looking for. Even on just the few days that I was there, we found an abundance of artifacts and food remains. It was very exciting. Apparently not all days in the dig are this exciting, I was told, but so far my experiences definitely show otherwise. Maybe I'm just happy to dig through dirt. I come from a line of farmers on both sides of my family. I love the dirt. Maybe that's all it was. But since the trenches had already been begun by looters and had received intervention from the archaeologists and professionals in the area, this means that the trench was about 3 to 4 feet deep in some areas already and was carefully being excavated section by section. So there were about 5 sections in the trench I was working on. Only about 4 were being actively dug because I believe the 5th section had hints of bone in it, which means stop, do not proceed. I don't, it could have just been animal bone, but I believe they didn't know what it was and they weren't going to get involved with it at that point. So that part was just left alone, and rightfully so. If there is even a remnant of human bone decay, that indicates there could be a grave there, and we have to stop work in that area. In fact, one of the sections that we were working on had the hint of maybe having bone decay. So again, we had to work around that area. It could have been a raccoon bone, but better safe than sorry. We then were careful to not disturb that area anymore, or as best as we could. And then I believe there is a procedure that can or must be done regarding human potential burial area. And this is just discolored dirt. It's not like we're digging up skulls. Things were if there is a hint of remains, typically it's going to have totally been decayed. And it will just be discolored dirt, which is one reason why it's very important to associate in a dig with someone very educated and with a very practiced eye who can see dirt that's just a different color that will then maybe indicate something that needs to be left alone. A post hole was found. Again, this also needs a seasoned eye, like potential bone decay. The post was gone, but the wood had fully disintegrated back into the earth, and the dirt was a different color than the dirt around it. But it was a different color for a reason. There was a post there. So perhaps a structure was built there, perhaps a structure supported by posts, perhaps a house stood there at one point. One of the most prevalent things any dig will likely produce is, especially shell middens, it's a kitchen heap, animal bones. So since it was a trash pile, the bones went here. Shells from marine animals which had been hunted, bones, snake bones or vertebrae, perhaps fish bones, those small round ones. I'm not sure how many of those we found. I don't remember them, in number, but I assume we found fish bones. Charcoal, this can be used for some dating purposes. You will probably find quite a bit of charcoal in the dirt in your digs, and the project leader may decide to keep some. It's not necessarily incredibly important to keep it all, but if there's a larger piece, they may want it for research purposes later. Pottery pieces even. I was able to dig up some pottery pieces. This was one of the most exciting things for me. Digging in the dirt, and lo and behold, pottery just hidden there. Not a whole, pot. It was thrown away for a reason. It was broken. But still, it was a remnant, and it was very, very cool to see that. I have to say, one of the coolest thing I found was unearthing something. It was beautiful and white, almost translucent. It seemed very delicate. I believe it was a lithic. The project leader advised it would have been used for making tools. So, it wasn't a tool, but it was very beautiful. It seemed a little bit more rare to find and unusual. So that was very cool to have a part in, unearthing that from the dirt. So, what's the value here? What have I learned from all this? I've loved to experience the value and, of this work firsthand. I know how much I love it now. It worked out well because I didn't find out that I didn't like it. I found out that I really loved it and it was a good connection for me. Also, networking, it's very easy to do when you're getting involved. It just happens organically. It's very natural. Archaeologists seem to be quite a friendly lot. As our teachers evidence here at Ashford, although they have high levels of education and impressive careers, they're easy to talk to, and they want to help students who want to get involved in their field. Even if you're shy or introverted, if you're helping, it's natural. You're just having conversation. You're just meeting people.
Thank you
Of course,
so
this is a
much,
resume
Sarah. That
builder.
was
All this
excellent.
volunteer
It was
work. It's a
very
resume
interesting to
builder.
learn about
I now
your
have
work
easy
and
experience,
how you were
when you look for
able
those
to
jobs and
both
they
learn
want you to
about
say
that
you have 5
specific
years of
place
experience.
and to
Well,
learn
I don't
about the
have 5 years, but I
processes
have a
of
start. I have some.
an
I learned
archaeological
about the
dig.
software, the Past Perfect. I
Not
have
to
lab
mention the
experience. I
museum
even have
work,
a little
how to
bit of digging
catalog things. I mean,
experience.
those two things go
And like I said
together.
earlier, that networking, it's great
So
for
both kind of
references. You
the
can
content, what you
potentially
learned
meet
about this island and
connections
the
for your
people that
grad
live
school
there
letters of
and about this
recommendation.
process,
Maybe
it's
they'll have
excellent.
a
And
hint on
I
where
really
to
want
look
to
for a
encourage
job or
everyone
work connections.
to think about
These
this.
things all happen with knowing people in the
Would you
field. And
like
how
to
do
go
you
out
know?
and
Well,
volunteer or
volunteer
have an
work is a
internship
major way to meet people.
uh,
So I have to say
locally
that
or somewhere
this
else
volunteer work, along with the
to
education that I'm
enhance your
receiving, my
CV,
formal
to build
education, is
connections.
going to be a great start to my future.
I'm
And
just going
I'm
to
very
post some
happy that
things
I've been
here.
able
One
to
is a
find
link to the
these
American
volunteer work.
Anthropological Association
That's it.
that have some internship and field work or field school opportunities. They're competitive, but have a look. See if there's something there. Then we have Shower Bomb. Just going to get that website for you.
It's awesome.
There we have volunteer and internship and work opportunities across the nation. And also abroad. So have a look there if that is what you're interested in. And Sarah brought out some excellent other ways of finding opportunities locally. Search for historical societies, search for parks, search for reservations. If you're interested in going into more kind of the social work side. Look at what is available there. Could you learn something about groups um, in your community by volunteering or internships in, say, humanitarian organizations, aid organizations, other forms of support? So there are a lot of opportunities, and it's just a question of grasping them. Do we have any questions? Have any of you here, Chantel, Clinton, and Daphne, have you considered this? Have you searched? Are you planning to? And as I just wrote, researchers, anthropologists, I mean, we love talking about our work and about anthropology. Normally, you can't shut us up. So please ask. You know, we continue just talking. So, uh, of course, it's not something that is possible for everyone. And Clinton, I think the army in general also gives a lot of excellent background. So of course, it's a matter of what is possible. Maybe it will be possible at a later point. Chantel and Daphne. Again, something might come up. But there are many opportunities. And just think that it's not something that you need to do at a specific point. It's continues to be relevant. And it really builds CVs. Oh yeah, Clinton, actually that's an excellent idea. It's very important work, of course. It's very tough work, but very important. Ensure the dignity and respect and closure for both the fallen and for the families at home. And that's definitely something that would be relevant for further anthropological studies. And have a look, when that comes up, have a look at the websites I listed, and of course search in Google. Consider, if possible, look if your local historical society, if your regional anthropological society have conferences where you might meet people that have opportunities, or just in general learn what's going on in your local area. For instance, since I live in California, I attend the conferences and work with the Southwestern Anthropological Society, because that's my region. When I was in Iowa previously, it was Central States Anthropological Society. Both of these regional societies are often very welcoming to students. So have a look. You can find a lot of this information also on the American Anthropological Association's website. Not all of it, but a lot of it is there. And as I mentioned earlier, one thing to keep in mind is that our discipline is so broad that when you search for something, it doesn't need to have the title anthropology in it. It can have a lot of other things. If you look at museums work, historical society, reservation work, there's a lot of different archaeology, of course, there's a lot of different terms and a lot of different areas that would be relevant with your background and for your future career. Do we have any further questions, comments? Anything you would like to ask me or Sarah? Clinton is typing. Let's see what Clinton has to say. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I
Um,
know. I mean, out here
Clinton asked
west in
if I have
California, when I
plans on
go
continuing in
for
Tampa or
hikes
broader
with my
plans.
dogs
I'm
on
living
the
in Tampa
local
right
trails,
now to be
I
close to
come
my
across
family while I have
these
a teenage
stuff. You know,
sister still
the
around the house
stones
down
that
about an hour
people
south. So
used
for now,
to
I'm going to be in
grind,
Tampa, but in
that the
about a
local
couple
indigenous
years,
people
2 or 3
used
years,
to
I'm
grind
thinking I'll probably be
flour
somewhere
for the
else,
food. So
although I'm
that's
not
incredible. You
sure
can see that
exactly
just
where. I
hiking.
do love Florida history. I grew up in Florida. It has a rich, First
Another
People, First Nations,
remnants of it
Native
sometimes that
American
are
history in Florida.
carvings on the stones too. Not
So I
all of it
do
has
love
been,
Florida history.
maybe some of
But
it is
I'm
still just
thinking
upgrades.
broader
Incredible.
plans. Someday I do want to start grad work, and then we'll see where that takes me. But I love to be out west, and that also has a very old history as well, even beyond people. So yeah, broader plans, probably somewhere out west. Yeah, I don't know where yet though, but I do love Tampa for a couple more years. Thanks for asking.
In this region around where I live, there's a lot of mostly the Kumeya nation or tribe that has been around here or still is here.
Wow, just walking along. That's amazing. Huh.
Definitely. It's definitely what I always say, go to your local university's website, have a look at what the professors do, what they work on. If you see something and you think, that's really interesting work and research that's being done here,
Actually,
uh, you can contact and see if you can get involved. I mean, I have had. I apologize for barking dogs. I'm just going to let them out of the
wow.
room.
Dr. Peterson, I was just thinking that, for someone like Chantel
Well,
who's
yeah. So
finding out there
yeah,
may
go on the
not be a
local
lot of
university's
museums
website,
or
see
groups in her
what
area.
professors,
And I'm wondering
what
if
they
maybe
work
even
with.
getting
There's
involved in like
often
one of the
they often
schools in
have
her
the
area, like
research
in the
listed. If you look
history
around,
or
spend some
science,
time
like
in
even
that.
just helping out or
And I
volunteering
know
as like an
that, for
aide,
instance, when I worked on
might
my
actually
dissertation
help,
and further when I
boost
was
that
in Iowa,
resume and
I had
also,
some
give an
volunteers helping with
academic
coding some
connection there as
data
well.
and some other
Because
things. So
every area has schools.
that happens
Um,
definitely. I'll consider also Chantel. I mean, that's definitely a great idea. I would do that. And then consider looking at if you, for instance, looking at the websites I gave, see, I don't know your situation. If you're able to go away for, say, a couple of weeks at a point in a summer on some other point, there might be opportunities for kind of a short-term participation in a dig, a volunteer work at some place. That's also an opportunity. I know it can often be difficult with family and jobs, uh, but if say like 2 weeks can be carved out, then that's definitely also an option. Clinton was writing. Any further questions or comments? Thank you so much, Sarah. This was so interesting. I hope it inspires other majors. And I wish you the best of luck with your work. And thank you for everyone who joined us. And this will be sent out so everyone will have access to it. Everybody have a great weekend.